he got walked a few times because that's when they put in their minor league pitchers and try it out. So he didn't get such good pitches to hit because they're wild from the minor leagues. He said it wasn't real, not pitched to.
Right, so when Hank Greenberg got into the Hall of Fame, he was the first Jewish person to get into the Hall of Fame?
Yeah. Sandy Koufax was next. Interesting fact is he was eligible to go into the Hall of Fame in 1947, and he only went into the Hall of Fame in 1965.
Oh, Hank Greenberg?
Yeah.
Why was there such a delay? They just didn't think he was accomplished enough?
I guess.
What about Sandy Koufax, and of course the famous story that he didn't want to pitch on Yom Kippur? Tell us the story.
It was Yom Kippur, and he says, and it's a story that he didn't pitch, think like even another Yom Kippur, and all his teammates knew he wasn't going to pitch, so it wasn't such a big huge shock that he wasn't going to pitch that day. They said maybe he'd pitch. They didn't really know.
Well, it got into the papers pretty well. It was very well publicized that on the day of World Series that he didn't. It was a World Series game. That's why it was so special. Yeah, it was the
first World Series game.
And it came out on Yom Kippur. So he refused, and his team backed him up, and the manager?
The owner didn't back him up. The players knew there was about an 80% chance he wasn't going to even pitch, so they didn't really even. They hoped he would. They wanted him to, but they knew it was a small chance he would.
And tell us a little bit about statistics of Sandy Koufax.
An interesting fact is the night Adolf Eichmann got captured, he was going into the game with a 28-31 lifetime record. He came up and pitched a one-hit ball, and from then on he started pitching great ball. He went on to have something like 140 and 50s, 140 wins and 50 losses.
So what did they say? They tipped it off over here? It's a coincidence. What about some other statistics? His strikeout record he was famous for? Yeah,
because he had 382 strikeouts in 1 year, topped by Nolan Ryan in 1973 with 383. So now Nolan Ryan holds for the record for most strikeouts in a season. And he had, I think, two other times he had 300 strikeouts, and he had a lifetime of strikeouts of about 2,700 strikeouts, and he missed the rest of his career with some trouble in his arm, and in his first 6 years he did nothing. He was completely backwards.
You couldn't get the...
Yeah, he was something like 30 and 40.
You couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
He finally got his act together.
Yeah, got it. But he says he got his act together the night Adolf Eichmann got captured.
It's an interesting coincidence. They don't connect it for anything. He said ever.
No.
That was the reason. Got enthused and motivated because of that. Well, of course, these are Hall of Famers, and people know their baseball, heard of their names. But there's other Jewish stars in baseball that. They were good, but never got into the Hall of Fame. Only the greatest ones get into the Hall of Fame. Could you tell us about other Jewish baseball players that have come through the ages?
Ken Holtzman was a real good ball player for the A's, then went on to the Cubs and threw 2 no-hitters with them. Mo Berg was a catcher, and he was also a spy. And
you know anything about that? So tell us a little bit more about his spy.
He knew about, I think, 11 or 12 languages, so that he was very valuable for a spy. And when he was in the bullpen, he would bring, like, Arab newspapers with him, all these different language newspapers, and the pitchers in the bullpen used to kid him and would get onto his case and say, "You're sure you're not an Arab spy or Israeli spy or Italian spy or?"
He knew so many languages. So
yeah.
America used him out as a spy. Can you tell us when he actually spied for America?
From in the early teens, in the World War I.
Where did he go to? Into Europe?
Well, yeah, went to Europe.
He knew the languages, so he looked around over there. That's interesting. It's a famous story, actually, that a lot of people don't know. The Mo Berg story about being just not only a baseball player, which he really wasn't that great of a baseball player, but he was some kind of funny person because he was an intellectual. Better he should have been a professor. Probably would have been more fitting to his character, but
yeah.
he was a catcher, and they finally used out his talents as an intellectual.
He graduated with something like 4 degrees out of college.
And he said, well, he wanted to play baseball. I guess that's the dream of every American kid, to play baseball. Even though he could have been a professor, he played baseball. So we have Mo Berg and we have Ken Holtzman. Of course, I remember from Chicago as a Chicago Cub. Any other people? I mean, actually, the first professional Jewish baseball player was Jewish, wasn't he?
First?
Leip. What was his name? Mr. Lip or something?
Oh yeah, they called him a nickname Mr. Lip.
And he was the first person to get paid, which is 100 years, to get paid for playing baseball. So he made it into the business. Now, I don't know what he would say when he hears that they're getting $1 million a year, like for just going around hitting a ball, but it's a different idea altogether. Any other famous baseball players that you've known or gone through your research?
There's Al Rosen when he was with the Cleveland Indians, and he turned out into a real home run hitter. He was a real great star, but he wasn't a Hall of Famer. He wasn't really close to being a Hall of Famer.
It was good. So was he ended up in the San Francisco Giant organization, or?
I'm not really sure.
I think I heard that he was a general manager there. So they end up in the front office. Actually, who was it? The assistant commissioner of baseball now is Hank Greenberg's son, isn't he?
Steve Greenberg?
Yeah, Steve Greenberg. So eventually they can't play it on the ball. They have to find it in the different arenas of the front office, as they say, the executive tower.
But Steve Greenberg when he went to Yale, he was a first baseman captain, like George Bush.
That's what George Bush was?
Yeah, he was also the soccer player, George Bush.
So I guess it's big news if you get to be the captain of the Yale baseball team. You have big things coming to you. So besides these few, and as we said from the outset, there really aren't that many Jewish baseball players that have been going around the scenes for the 100 years of baseball. What about other sports? Have there other great Jewish football players, soccer players, basketball players?
Well, there's Ron Mix. He says he was like a Dirty Harry. He was an offensive lineman, and some people said he was one of the best offensive linemen, or he was the best offensive lineman, and he played with the Los Angeles Rams part-time.
Ever make it into the Hall of Fame? I don't know.
No.
They never gave it to him. And who else? Football isn't that big of a sport for the Jewish people also. Well, nowadays there's Marv Levy.
Yeah,
Tell us about him.
Marv Levy is now the head coach of Buffalo, and he once went into a synagogue he said just to get acquainted with it, but not really to study.
And then, but he finally ended up as a professional football team, right?
Yeah.
Getting into the Super Bowl twice, so he has his good marks to go together with him. And going around, actually, if boxing can be called a sport, which is a question in itself, people get in the ring and then they pound each other, but still it is considered as a sport. Any famous Jewish boxers?
There's not real famous ones, but there was Ted Kid Lewis, whose real name was Gershom Mendeloff, and there was Ted Kid Kaplan.
When did they fight? When are you talking about? What years?
The 20s and the early 30s.
Oh, way back then.
Yeah.
They always say that boxing was a sport that people try to get out of the ghetto, that the people had bad economics. So they figure, a normal person wouldn't box and get their head knocked in, but if you have no other way of getting out of the poverty, then you can use it. And the Jewish people in the 20s and the 30s also were like that they were just in a poverty state in America, and therefore that was their time to get into boxing. Well, there was that famous boxing in 1930 between the German and, you know about that story? When the Nazis were actually coming to power, and there was a famous, what's his name, Max Schmidt or something, the famous. Yeah, and the Jewish person actually beat him up over here. It was a German, it was almost a political bout and not only a sports bout, which is, of course, interesting. Well, you have Jewish people always on the scene. Of course, the Israelis participate in the Olympics, but tell us about their, how well they do, or...
They've never really participated in, like, football and baseball, but they've participated, like they say, basketball is a Jewish people's game, and there've been tennis and swimmers, like swimmers, and
like, tell us about Spitz now.
Mark Spitz won 7 gold medals in one year.
That still stands as a record, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that was the famous Olympics in '72 in Munich, in Germany, where the Arab terrorists went out and killed the Israelis' sports stars, and people were afraid that Mark Spitz, being Jewish, of course he was an American, but being that he was Jewish, that maybe he would have terrorist acts also. So the Americans started putting up their own military guard, whatever have you, their police guard around him, because they thought he would have a terrorist act against him also. I think they flew him out of Germany at that time on an Air Force jet, just to be sure nothing should get bombed. So that was also like Jewish sports news in a more of an unfortunate sense in the '72 Olympics. But usually during the other times, I mean, Mark Spitz was an American. He won it for the American country. Really, the Israelis really weren't that big, and they do send a team every year, every 4 years, whatever, to the Olympics. But sports really isn't their big, isn't their cup of tea, so to speak. They really don't get the best athletes or medal athletes.
Hank Greenberg commented in later 1972 that he said that he felt no personal, threat that more people would be attacked, and it was just some thing, and there's going to always be terrorists in the whole thing, so there's always going to be people killed because of their race. And he said he really never felt any anti-Semitic names being called at him, just names because he was being a ball player and he was good, so they wanted to get on his back and then he would play bad ball. Steve Greenberg also said, that he felt that it wouldn't do anything to his sports career or anything like that. Ken Holtzman and Mike Epstein, they wore black bands around their arms for a week after the terrorist attack. And Mike Epstein commented after that, Richie Sandbaum, he also wore a black band. He commented that after he said in the newspapers, he popped off to the newspapers, he said afterwards that he thought there would be some more, like, letters to him, saying, give up, stop being a pop-off or else we'll kill you, But he got none of those letters. No one's saying he was a pop-off and everything. he said he's quite surprised. That was just probably because they were too shaken by the attack to listen too much to anyone.
In 72. Well, that was an unfortunate sports. I think it was one of the more unfortunate acts in sports history, was really, to bring in terrorism. Usually sports is in a way to make bridges between countries. And when America and China was at odds, the first way that they connected with each other was through a ping pong event. Usually sports is a way that maybe everybody plays equally and it's on your own merits. And unfortunate that terrorism has to be brought into a sports event. Well, we talked about baseball, a little basketball. What about the Harlem Globetrotters? That's always a famous story.
Something unusual. Some people know, a lot of people don't. That the person who started it was Abe Saperstein, a Jewish. He also started. I don't know what it was called, but like a Globetrotter, but it wasn't called that. Baseball team. And they
didn't work out.
Yeah. So it was a story when Hank Greenberg was the general manager at Cleveland. It was that Abe Saperstein said, "Here, take this guy. He's big. He might do it. Give him a try." So he's 6'5", 240. Came in. They gave him a bat. His fingers were so big that it was way over. That you need like a thicker back for him, because they just went like right across, and they would touch his hand again. And then when they threw him balls, he was hitting him in the center field stands and into the outfield and the bleachers. So they started just throwing him worn out balls. Like, they weren't tennis balls, but they were battered up balls already used. They couldn't use them, and they weren't even regular balls that they use for practice. So they get started. He started hitting also those battered up balls already into the center field bleachers. They put him down because they thought he needed a year of minor league, and he hit .330 and was never heard of again because he took basketball.
Really?
Yeah, because he was a Harlem Globetrotter. He sent them over to baseball. He's because Abe Saperstein saw his muscles. So he said, "Here, give him a try."
Well, maybe he would have made more money in the baseball. There's a lot of business, of course, in the baseball and the sports world today. But the fun of the game really maybe has gone out a little bit because everybody's worried about themselves. But be that as it may, that's life here. So we talked a little bit about baseball, a little bit about basketball. Do you know anybody about Kramer? Barry Kramer, actually.
Yeah.
You know about him? So let's hear a little bit about
him. He played with, I think he played in Tennessee University, and he was supposed to live up to more in his thing, but he came up and was only with a few years and he was gone.
But really, in his college years, he was one of the best college players ever.
Yeah.
And he actually, of course, that person, Barry Kramer, lives in Schenectady today. He's actually a local. That he came from Shenandoah. I think he went to school there in a high school, and he actually was one of the best players actually ever in the college scene. At least in those days, in the early 60s. But like you say, he never made it into the pro, like many college players. So what about a few of the other basketball players? There's really not too many. I guess they're not 7 feet tall nowadays. But in the olden days, they had some good basketball players. So baseball, basketball, a little bit of boxing. Football isn't too much. Yeah, I warned the audience that it was going to be the smallest book, really, that's ever written. That's the old common joke about Jewish sports stars. And really, as we see, it really may be the truth that there's very few Jewish sports stars. Maybe can have your answers for it. Maybe it's like you say. I mean, it looks nice when one person makes $1 million, but that's only a few people and far between. And it's many years of being on the road and doing little things, and finally to have your break. Maybe that they feel that they have other things to do. Actually, I know Sandy Koufax was ready to give it up, like you said before, that he wasn't really great at the beginning, and he really was ready to give it up also, just to keep trying and doing nothing with yourself. You might as well throw in the towel and try something else in life. So are there any other sports for us? Football?
Yeah,
You know, there is.
there's Sid Lockman of the Chicago Bears who invented the T formation. The T formation. He'd take the snap and the center would hand it to him. He'd fake it to one or the fullback or the halfback. Then he would go back and then take a pass, and it turned out to the T formation.
And he was the first one to invent that. So Sid Luckman, they actually did make it into the Hall of Fame. Do you know that?
Yeah.
The Football Hall of Fame. So for his innovation for the Chicago Bears. There weren't that too many Jewish football players. I don't think that there anybody today on the scene. Bring us up to date. In baseball?
In baseball, there's Steve Rosenberg in the Mets organization. He was traded to the Mets just recently.
Is he doing anything, or he really has to make it up through the ranks like everybody else?
Yeah, he went down pretty low at the start, and I guess he wants to really get it up there. He'll probably make it to about AAA or AA this year.
Well, you never know. It's the different breaks. People do good, and that they jump over here. You know, it takes a few years for them to become better baseball players, a real professional in the major league. It takes a long time. People don't understand that, how much years, how many hours goes into practicing and trying to make it for these people. It's a long haul, but if people want to do it, they can do it. So we have Steve Rosenberg in the Mets organization. Is there anybody you know of else? I don't know if it's really very few and far between, I think, in the basketball and the football area, in maybe the front office. There's some Jewish people. We talked about Steve Rosenberg. He's assistant commissioner.
Steve Greenberg.
Steve Greenberg, I'm sorry. And, well, like we say, it's hard to look for Jewish sports stars. We're trying to jog over the information and trying to figure it out. But like we can safely say, there really aren't too many. There really are very few Jewish sports stars for whatever reason that there could be. Like we say, maybe economic, and I don't think there's really anti-Semitism there, but it's just like it really wasn't a major thrust of the Jewish people, even in Israel. I mean, there's a few tennis stars now.
Yeah.
There's a few major tennis stars that are Jewish, are Israeli, but again, very few and far between of any different sports. Actually, what you actually do find is many Jewish people in the Jewish media, not the Jewish media, the media who are Jewish, like in the sportscasters. Brent Musburger, you had Howard Cosell. Tell us about a few of these people.
Howard Cosell, he would usually do like have sports shows and talk about it. From what I know, he wasn't really liked by much, and he didn't have real proper language either.
Well, but he went far though. But you're right. There's been a few Jewish people in the media writing columns, and also, like we say, writing and broadcasters that became famous. So, trying to jog our memory as much as we can over here and try to dig up as much information. But as you see, that Jewish sports stars in American history is very few and far between. But again, that they have made their marks, whether on the field with their few Hall of Famers, the few people, or also in the front office in certain senses. They're the owners or the people who innovated different ideas in sports. The first professional baseball player. Well, look where we are today after all that, being paid for it. And therefore we could see, of course, that they have made their mark, maybe not a tremendous mark, but some kind of mark. And that's why we asked View-Sruly Simon, who reads up and knows a lot. Again, a person doesn't have to research it for 10 years. There's not that much information. But it's always interesting to look at it from a Jewish point of view also. Who are the Jewish sports stars? Who are the wheelers and dealers behind the scenes? And thank you very much, View-Sruly, for coming and sharing us some information about Jewish sports stars in America.
And thank you for inviting me to come here and express from what I know.
Thank you.